I'm so happy, Tyler, that I was able to travel to make the journey to see your home renovation project come to life today. So welcome to What Lights Us Up.
Thanks for having me.
It's so great to sit in this house and I've heard so much about it. I've been watching it on Instagram and just to see it sort of come to life and where you are with it today. And it's definitely, I can't wait to unpack it. I've always wanted to fix up an old home, so this is very dear to my heart. And so I'm personally excited to just hear this story. We're sitting here in this old home in the town of Holyoke, Massachusetts, but you work full time in New York City. So for those of you listening, New York City is about 3 hours from where we're sitting in Holyoke, Mass. What attracted you to Holyoke and to taking on the project of fixing up this old house so far from your day-to-day life?
Well, I've always been interested in post-industrial America. I grew up outside of Hartford. We spent time in Syracuse. These are cities that were once so much more than they are now, in many ways and many times not due to faults of their own. And I feel like there's so much latent energy, things that have usefulness, that have had their value questioned, but really have a lot of opportunity. And so I was actually taking the train from New York to Burlington, Vermont years ago, and we passed through Holyoke. And after leaving Springfield, I looked out the window and I saw these amazing warehouses and these industrial canals, and I literally said to myself, where are we? Because this is really beautiful. And it started a research project of learning more about what this city was and where it started and where it's ended up. And the more I dug, the more interested I got. And then I looked for opportunities of how can I get my foot in the water over there? Like, what could a home base be? And I actually had a couple of false starts, and this house ended up being a piece of property that was being offloaded by the city and needed someone to sign on board to take care of it and assume this project. And that ended up being the catalyst for the first project here, hopefully the first project of many.
Wow. So is it a protected historical landmark, or was it identified by the city as that, or it's just sort of, how did the city identify it?
So this property actually went into tax receivership. It really kind of fell into disrepair over the years. It is not protected. Unfortunately, I think cities like Holyoke have just a plethora of historic, amazing architecture, but the means to protect it is difficult. I can say firsthand, it's challenging and it takes a lot of work. And so this house is not protected, but hopefully by the time I'm done, it's something worthy of protecting.
I'm so like you said, industrial, revolution, architecture, design. I'm so attracted to homes predated to 1930s as well. And I always sometimes drive down the street and say, oh my gosh, I wonder what happened in that house. What was the story of that house? It's so beautiful. It's so pretty. I'd love to live in it. Picture the yard and the flowers I'd plant in the front. I feel like it's rare now, though, to see old homes preserved. So in a way, I'd like to think that if I had the means to buy one, that I can save one when I have, the means. I love to imagine what people and stories occurred in a home throughout its history. What lights you up about being a part of this house's story, and what do you hope to achieve with this project?
I mean, like you, I think that there's so much beauty and craft and, again, latent energy in things that were built in this era. I mean, it was a time of such expansion and artistry in the U.S. And so it always pains me to see stuff like that disintegrate, to get to a point where we can never appreciate it anymore or get it back. So just knowing that I can save pieces of this and that there will be more of the original house than new house when I'm done, but it will be a next phase in this house's life and in my life, is really gratifying to me.
Have you found any cool tidbits as we're sitting here and there's no drywall. We're down to the studs. We see some exposed brick. Have you seen any, carvings in the brick or in the wood, or sometimes people hide, sometimes notes or hidden secrets, or, they have a height. Sometimes they mark the heights of their kids as they were growing. I mean, have you found anything throughout the house that's kind of interesting to its history?
Some of the most interesting stuff is marks of people who made the materials that went into it. So when we took the clapboards off the outside of the house, on the back they're branded with the name S.L. Griffith, who ended up being this industrial entrepreneur in Vermont who built a series of hardware stores that grew into wood production and eventually made things like cedar clapboards. And so things like that are just a window into what, you know, people of that time, and I think again add a history to and weight to the house.
Very cool. Have you looked up who that person is?
I have. He was an entrepreneur, but also a philanthropist, and apparently he grew his business. I think it was in Berlin, Vermont, and was apparently a very well-regarded man, and really just continued to build and continued to donate, and seemed like he lived a great life.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. So you work full-time as an architect.
Yes.
And so I have to imagine you have some skills in home building and renovations, probably more than I would have. Walk us through the steps you took from purchase to actually starting to fix the house from the ground up, and where are you currently in the process? I can see it a little bit here, but for our listeners who can't see it.
So I think being an architect definitely helps. You have a lot of day-to-day knowledge. I think it was really the fact that I worked in construction throughout high school and college that gave me a lot of the skills and experience that I would have needed to take on a project of this magnitude. So without that, it would have been much more difficult, or I think I would have needed a different kind of support team in order to do a lot of what's been done. So after acquiring the house from the city, I think the architect role of mine kicked in. So we would, you know, survey the house and did design drawings, just like I would for any other client. The nice part about it was that designing for yourself as a client means that you can make all the decisions that maybe you wish you could make on other projects sometimes. So then we had to file for permits just like everybody else would. And after that point, we could really start with demolition and pulling the house apart. The house was full of another life's stuff. Like, I wouldn't necessarily call it a hoarder's house, but it was really, really full of stuff. We removed 5 dumpsters worth of things from this house.
So someone had just abandoned it as it was. I mean, there was furniture. I mean, so you really saw the previous story of the house.
Yes, absolutely. I think it was really vacant for about 2 years, but it was as it was left, basically. And there was not a room or space in this house from basement to the attic that was not full of things.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so for those of us listening, because I really want to fix up a house, and I'm here, but I am thinking, okay, put myself in a situation. I don't know anything about home renovations. I walk into a house, it's full of stuff. I mean, anyone can get overwhelmed with cleaning their own stuff, let alone walking into a house full of stuff that's not yours, that's maybe dirty and disgusting and you don't want to touch it. Walk us through literally the steps that did you go room by room? Like, how did you get organized and figure out, okay, where am I going to start? You had your plans drawn up, but you had to clean the house first. And then, I mean, anyone can just spin out in thinking, okay, this is like way too overwhelming. I don't know what to do next.
It was, quite literally making room in the front hall and having boxes of trash bags and deciding which direction you were going to move in to get more floor space. I mean, I think every time more floor space was revealed, it was considered a win of the day. So yes, trash bags and trash bags of things. And at that point, eventually there was enough room to consolidate in every room and actually take measurements and make it so that the design process could continue while the clean out process was also continuing at the same time.
So did you start one room at a time, or did you say, okay, I'm going to rip up the floors first, and then I'm going to tear down whatever walls I've indicated I want to tear down. I'm going to pull out the drywall. I need to see what's behind the studs and what I need to replace. Like, walk us kind of through those steps. No electricity. I mean, you're in the middle of wiring, right?
We have power now.
Oh, you have power now. Yes.
But yeah, when we started, after everything was cleaned out,
yes,
we went through, I think, in a systems kind of way. So we removed all the drywall everywhere,
okay,
or I should say plaster. So it's all plaster and lath. So it all comes off in pieces, and then the boards that hold the lath that holds the plaster on comes off. And in that sense, you go room by room. You usually do the walls, and then we do the ceiling, and
Okay.
then we went from there. So that alone is, that was a large process.
Okay.
And then in some places we picked up the floors, and once we had kind of a shell or a skeleton, that allowed us to really start the framing process. By that point, of course, we had permits, and we were beginning to frame out what the new aspects of the house would be from a spatial perspective.
Awesome. So you've changed the layout a little bit, but sort of held the bones. And is your vision for the interior design to sort of replicate a little bit dating back to the era of the house? Or, sometimes you see houses and they've gone completely modern on the inside. Sort of what is your aesthetic visually for this house?
I actually think as an architect, I am interested in what we can learn from history, and I also think that in most cases, things that are designed and built today should feel some degree of current. They're a representation of their time, just like this house was a representation of its time. So in what I've drawn and what I can envision, they are what I would call historically inspired details that have been streamlined or reimagined to something that would be not mistaken for something that was built 100
Okay.
years ago.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of both, I think.
I love that. I love that. I mean, I get so sad when I see a house that on the inside it looks so historical on the outside, and you walk in and it's all modernized, So I like to think that it's a little bit of it is preserved.
I think it should be a complete thought.
Yeah, exactly. It's part of its story, right? We are so often caught up in expecting a certain outcome and in life as we try to plan our journey. And I don't know how you started it, if you were on your own starting this project, thinking about when you were tearing down the walls and starting to go room by room, or if you actually had someone with you sort of in the process, or if you hired help. It's so easy to get disappointed when something doesn't work out the way we initially intended or desired. And I've come to understand that it's much easier to allow life to flow through us and to appreciate experiences as they are instead of how we imagine them to be. The joy is in the present moment and accepting life and its situations as events that lead us down the path we were meant to follow, even if it's not how we imagined it. How has this project evolved since you took it on, and what have you learned in the process?
I think there are a couple aspects to that. I think in some of the biggest ways that it has evolved, I did start this process with my wife at the time, and we had thought of this project together as part of a beginning of a new direction that existed outside of New York, and open-ended as to what that could find. And unfortunately, my marriage ended about a year ago, and that has certainly changed the day-to-day reality of what working on this project feels like, and what the creation of that vision and its evolution continues to exist as. It's not a combination of visions. It's now me carrying that vision on to completion. So, and it was certainly tough, and I think it in many ways forced a recalibration, or at least a pause in understanding what that change in direction was. That being said, I think there are still things about this house and this town and this project that I love just as much now as when I started. And I think it's been those things, not only the things that I've learned, the people that I've met here, that have continued to make it worthwhile and are more than enough justification to continue pressing forward. So I agree. I think that it is easy to get pulled down by doing something alone that you thought you were going to be doing with somebody else, and getting overwhelmed by that. But at the same time, there are still so many positive aspects that you can focus on that are still worthwhile, and I think worth pursuing.
That's so key, because you touched on 2 points: being overwhelmed. I know I talked about it before too. whether you're overwhelmed by yourself or whether you rely on someone to get over that overwhelming feeling and say, okay, I need help tackling this project. I started it with someone, I don't know where to start, and someone's really there to lean on, and then all of a sudden they're not there anymore. And so it's a shift in mindset, but it's going back to ourselves and thinking, okay, why did I start this project? What was my core root and passion that sort of drove this project? And you go back to the time you were on the train, and that was your vision. That was your inquisitive mind that went and researched the town of Holyoke, because of what you saw out of that train window. And so even though you started that project with someone and it shifted, which I think is so important to talk about, because we can all take on projects and jobs and relationships and any kind of thing that we're passionate about with someone, and nothing's meant to last forever, and things change, things pivot, and that's part of the gift and part of the path of life, is how we learn to be resilient and how we learn to find our passion throughout life, regardless of what may cross our path, regardless of what because change is inevitable. I think change is going to happen no matter what. We might encounter a change in environment or who's around us or our, anything. And I think what we do with that change, I think is so important. And even though it doesn't always turn out the way we initially envisioned, just go with the flow and let it sort of happen the way it's meant to, right? So it's meant to sort of, this house is meant to have, it's part of its story, right? It's part of the story of resilience, and and the house will speak to generations to come on its people that fought for it and fought for the story of this house. And
yeah, I try to remember as an architect, especially when I'm designing anything, I sketch a lot. So I think a lot through my hand and through drawing things. The first sketch is never the last sketch. Like, even that process will always evolve. You'll always look at things differently, and you'll gain knowledge from the process that then reinforms the process again. So, and I think this is just one more example of that.
And I was going to say, even thinking off of that, when I was creating the cookbook, I went through evolutions of versions of it. And every time I went back to it or I asked people for advice, the next version would be even better.
Right.
And so the ending version was, oh my gosh, if I hadn't asked someone for help, or if I hadn't reached out to this person, or if I hadn't thought of that, or if it would have not looked the way it looked today. And so it's an evolution, right? If we landed at the initial thing that we started with, we'd be missing out on something that could be even better.
Absolutely. I'd say almost every time.
Right, exactly.
It's hard to think of examples where that's not the case.
Exactly. So it's like going back, believing in our passion and what's the driving force, and sort of allowing to happen however it happens, flow.
Definitely.
Yeah. So what advice do you have for someone wanting to buy literally a fixer-upper, but having no experience in architecture, contracting, and may even be setting out on the project alone? What advice do you have for them about to set out on this journey?
So I would say that even as an architect with construction experience, I went into this process with assumptions and expectations as to the timeline, how easy or difficult it would have been, and even I have been surprised or learned things along the way to understand that this is a very intense process. And even me, I try to remember all the time that this is not a solo project. It really never has been. There have been many, many people that have helped, and whether it was people actually on site, contractors, subcontractors, like it's an effort of large proportion to make all of this happen. So I would say somebody who was intrigued by the idea of fixing something would be to think about certainly the degree of which they want to pull things apart and put them back together. I mean, there's no definitive line. I would say, figure out the best way to fill in gaps of your knowledge that at least you know exist, and that might mean helping to assemble a team that can help you with that. Again, even with all my experience, I didn't do everything in this house. There are things that are outside of my purview, and they were from even before we started. So I think that's important. And I think approaching the process with patience and allowing yourself not to get caught up in expectations that don't have the room to evolve or become unreasonable is something that helps keep the process fun and realistic. And we would all like things to be tied to timelines, but they don't always really work out. And being able to, like you said, flow with that and say it's okay if this takes another 6 weeks or something like that. I think that is critical to doing these things, because there's always more to find. These buildings are full of surprises, not all good surprises, and but everything can be fixed.
And I'm even thinking, as you're talking, imagining myself literally driving into town, seeing a house, seeing a for sale sign, and not even thinking about it and saying, oh, that's really cute. And then going into the house, falling in love with it, and potentially buying it without even thinking, who am I going to bring in to help me? Because I don't have any experience in fixing up a house, but I so badly want to do it, and I want to preserve what's in it, and I would love to learn how to do it. I mean, I know I'm self-taught in a lot of ways, and I Google and YouTube stuff and how to, I built my own website, and you can do anything you want to do, and I do believe that. And like you said, electrician work or plumbing or something, you probably have to, ask someone. But again, going back to, sometimes you're not even thinking about the end outcome. You're just, oh my gosh, I'm coming from a passion of, I love this house, I want to fix up this house. And yeah, I mean, it's just going back to, I guess you buy it and you're like, oh gosh, now I have to go find people that are in the town and start talking to people. I would say start talking to people and connecting with people and networking and trying to find people to help you.
And I think as with any endeavor or any pursuit, there's a group of people out there. There's actually a community of people who enjoy doing this. And whether there are people that I found on Instagram or people that I found who live in Holyoke who are doing similar projects, it's not hard to find people who share that passion and are maybe pursuing it at the same time. And I would say almost always those people are more than willing to not only connect, but share their insights and share what they've learned. In many cases, they've been an asset, maybe even in cases people that I've never met face to face. But I think never be afraid to reach out, because you're never the only one pursuing whatever your goals are. So.
For sure. I mean, I've met so many people just doing this podcast
Sure.
and making connections, right? Now, the sign out front, as I was waiting for you this morning, it says another home renovation project. So tell us a little bit about the sign. Is there a, because it has your Instagram tag at Chasing Paper City,
Mm-hmm.
right? So have you done another project before? Or is it the construction group that does other homes in, is it another local project?
I think the goal was that in coming to Holyoke, this change of scenery wasn't just about a house. It was about being in a smaller community, something where there was an opportunity to have an impact that would be very difficult to achieve in New York City, no matter how long you were there. And finding more properties like this that needed a revisioning, repair, and being put on a new path for a new future. So I think in the end, the sign, which also references my architecture business, references this is another project in our design pursuits, but was also hopefully one in a series of projects that will happen locally in Holyoke as those opportunities continue to evolve.
Awesome. So it's a passion for the town and the house.
Absolutely.
I love that. Would you do this again if you knew what you know today, and how has this project changed your life?
So I think that this certainly over the past year has been a question that I've had to ask myself a number of times because it's obviously relevant. I think that had I known everything that I known about the house itself, there are certainly things that I would have done differently in the construction process. Learning experiences and even mistakes that were made that if I had started over, I think there would be a great opportunity to only make the house better with that knowledge, which is unsurprising. In terms of would I started this project alone, I think the answer is yes. I think there are, like you said, the things that drew me to this city and this house have not changed, and there's still things that I love. And I think for as challenging as aspects of the last year have been, I do get a lot of joy from the work itself, from the act of being able to fix old things, and hopefully in a way that they're going to extend beyond my time here. So I think the process has changed my life. I've met new friends, I've experienced new things, gotten a large amount of new knowledge, and in the end, even though, like you said, the end reality might have evolved and changed a bit, I think there's certainly more good surrounding this project than bad things.
Exactly, it was how it was meant to be. It was
Sure.
your path that was meant to be taken.
I can only hope so.
Right? That's awesome. I love it. And I can't wait to see the evolution of this house project. I know you're still working on it, but we talked about it. We're going to plan to do a little bit of a cooking video when the kitchen's actually built and the drywall's up. We're sitting in a room with studs and I can see exposed brick, which I love. But tell us where people can follow you, find you.
So the best way to follow the project would be through Instagram. It's at Chasing Paper City. And the goal is that after the 3 years that this project has been in motion, that a year from now, I should be wrapping up. That it should look and feel like a house and be something that is 99% done. I'm not sure anyone ever really finishes these projects, but yeah, we welcome the insight and people looking in, comments, and again, love to share the information that I've learned with other people who are trying to do this as well.
I love it. Anyone sort of from this area that might be interested in another future home renovation project in Holyoke, do you have a website for your architecture? Is that related or?
Absolutely. I mean, so the website is dcparchitecture.com, and I think there is definitely a goal that a body of work grows out of this area as well. Because again, even projects like this are not projects that are immediately accessible in New York City. It's just a different kind of world. So I would love the opportunity to help somebody from the design side go through this process or a similar process again.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Christina.
Thanks.